Cheap leads. Everybody wants them. But do you really? We're getting into it right now. All right, so let's talk about cheap leads. Everywhere you go, it seems like on the lead generation front, people want to focus on the cost. Now, I'm not crazy, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't have any target in mind for your cost. But if that's all you think about, I'm going to propose a different strategy. See, back in my day, we had a little bit of a different thought. We thought, how much can we spend to get a lead? So, in this alternative universe, let me propose a scenario. Scenario number one, you have somebody generating leads that's constantly trying to drive their cost down. What are they going to focus on? These days, it's probably going to be Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snap, whatever, wherever their target audience is, probably thinking about that platform alone. And they're probably going to think of what's my day one return on ad spend, or what's my 60-day return on ad spend? What's my time to pay back? Well, the second scenario over here is somebody who's thinking about how much can I spend on my leads? Now, that person is probably going to think of the day one ROAS and 60-day and time to pay back and all of that. But they're more likely to think about generating leads in a more holistic sense. So let's talk about that. First of all, when you refine your lead generation strategies, right, you go beyond the kind of digital only marketer thinking, you can get into some interesting territory. Now, I'll pose a question to you, and I'll do it in two ways. The first way is, and this one is more for the ladies, which would you rather have? An emailed picture of flowers on your birthday or actual flowers on your birthday? If you're a dude, would you rather somebody send you a picture of that new cool gadget, or would you rather get the gadget physically? I think we can agree that the physical representation of both of those things is pretty much what we want. We want to have the physical stuff. If I'm thirsty, I don't want you to send me a picture of a glass of water. I don't want an email about the 17 ways I can filter my water. I just want a drink of water. So what we're talking about here is a little bit beyond lead gen. So that's why I say refined lead gen strategy. Now, again, I'm not advocating that you cut any one thing out. I'm just saying, let's think of some refined strategies here. We need to have also data-driven testing. But again, let me expand the way we think about data-driven for a minute. Most of us, when we think about data-driven, we're thinking spreadsheet, what can I download? What's my ad costs? How many conversions did I get? Blah, blah, blah. And yes, that's important. But what about customer satisfaction? Now, I'm not personally a fan of the NPS. I think it's far too simple. I think it makes people lazy, but it's a good start. So what about the NPS? That's data. How about the number of referrals you get? That's also data. So when we take a different approach to the data that we're pulling in, we go beyond just the typical stuff that we can get, everybody talks about, comes from the platform, that also can lead up to this thing that I'm calling the refined lead gen strategy. Quality over quantity. We all say it, but do we really mean it? I think partially what's going on here when we think about the sort of give and take between quality and quantity is we're expressing a fear. It's like, well, I don't want to cut down the number of leads because I'm afraid sales are going to go down. And in a vacuum, I would say, you know what, you're probably right. And if all you're going to do is have a one-dimensional oh, what's that dial I can turn inside of my ad platform approach, you probably don't want to do this. But if you start to look at this holistically and you think, okay, let's start thinking about a refined lead gen strategy. Let's maybe go into the bygone days of when, oh, heaven forbid, you had to mail stuff and you didn't have any digital anything anywhere, and think about the customer experience in the lead gen. I'm not saying customer, in the lead gen phase. And then you start to think about, what other kind of data can I generate other than what the platform gives me? And then understand how all of that will filter down into this idea of quality. So frequently, when I'm talking with a SaaS founder or I'm working with a SaaS company, they'll talk about things like MQL. What about, what kind of marketing qualified, that's what that stands for if you don't know, marketing qualified lead. What kind of strategies you have for MQL? It's like, well, what do you mean by MQL? That's my first question. Because a lot of people think what you wind up doing is running people through this conversion process. You've got page number 1, page number 2. Maybe you have a download here. Maybe that goes into a phone call, right? So all of this would maybe fit into a marketing qualified lead. But really, in general, what I found, what most people mean is go and do some marketing magic and then spit out a number. So when I look at that, I see, oh, I've got the warm and fuzzy because that MQL number is where we want it. But again, most of that is driven from an educational base, which is devoid of the good old days of direct mail and sending envelopes. And so I'm trying to bring back at least some of the concepts from those days, because we had the same problems back then. We still had lots of competition. I mean, if you think about everybody's email box today, it used to be the mailbox. It was the TV. It's like people think that things are different, but at the end of the day, the concepts, the methodologies related to those concepts don't change. Now let's get into some specific tactics, because this is in the realm of strategy and theory, and I know everybody gets driven nuts when I start talking about theory because they think it's too slow. But like everything in life, we like to hear it from the stage, like, oh, if I'm going to start a project, I'm going to sharpen my axe. Like, that's great. We get rah-rah about that in the seminar, but then when we get home, all these fears start coming in, and we just think we can't take the time. So let's take a little bit of time here and think about this. Let's say you are selling a completely virtual product, right? So, excuse me. Let's say your selling process is completely virtual, right? You're e-commerce. You're a software as a service company. You're like, Maceo, come on. I'm not going to, drive to people's houses and sell them my stuff. Totally get it. I'm not going to drive to everybody's office and sell them my stuff. I want scale. Fine. Let's talk about scale. When you're generating leads in a virtual environment, you can still have involvement, right? So what I'm talking about here at the topmost level is simply involvement. Now, the brute force way of doing this is what? The demo call. Now, that's in a SaaS environment, right? So if you're selling software, you're going to push people, get on a demo, get on a demo, get on a demo. A lot of times what will happen is it'll just be free to sign up, right? Click here, no credit card needed, experience the software. So what are we trying to do there? We are trying to involve them. Right. And sometimes, and actually more often than not, this is called product-led growth. Now, the challenge here, oftentimes, when you transition from product-led growth, you're in a B2C or maybe, so B2C, that's, if you're not familiar, that's business to consumer. I've heard some people talk about B2 SMB, right? They're just trying to emphasize this is a small business. Let's break this apart for a second. What we're talking about when we say these words is really the entire sales process. The sales process. And because we're talking about the sales process in total, we forget that we started talking about marketing And now we've transitioned into talking about a holistic kind of thing. But it's useful to continue along this line of thought. Because when you have marketing, it's not like it's devoid or completely separated from sales. In fact, marketing feeds directly into sales, remember? Now let's go tangentially here. Let's just go on a tangent to get these creative juices going. Let's borrow a concept from, I'll say, copywriting or direct response thinking. In direct response thinking, you have what's called a front end, right? These would be leads and maybe, what we would call a low ticket sale. And then you've got back end. These would be customers and these would be high ticket. To give you an example, this might be a $39 or $49 purchase. And then hold on to your hat, this might be a $29.97 or $5,000. Right? So we're making this leap from the front end to the back end. Now remember, I started talking about cheap leads. I can't count the number of times that I have worked on, seen, heard about, talked to people who've ran campaigns where the front end generated 100,000 leads. And then on the back end, they died. So on the front end, let's say you're generating leads. And by the way, this would be super cheap for $80, $8 million, right, would be the total spend to generate those 100,000 leads, which means you have to monetize them. And back here, they generated, I'll just use an easy number, 800,000. Very common. Why does this happen? In one scenario that's popping into my mind, it was one of the greatest promotions ever. The copywriters bragged about it. The marketers bragged about it. The company with the product bragged about it. It's like, we generated so many leads. This is crazy. Best product ever. That's what they were saying publicly. But in the background, the ratio was not too far off from this. So what does it mean? It means that when they generated the leads and they had a marketing qualified lead, and then those people went into, we'll say, the sales process, or maybe a sales qualified lead, they got nothing. And it's because in the lead generation process, like the thinking going into the marketing, what they said to those people, what the context was, what the context and copy meant as far as those people's beliefs and what those beliefs meant relative to purchasing more products, all came into play. So again, all I'm highlighting here is that when you look at these things in a one-dimensional way, like, man, I just want a lot of cheap leads, or I just want a lot of leads, you can run afoul of some of this, because oftentimes on the marketing side, when we're turning our dials, we'll turn those dials, sometimes deliberately, sometimes not, in such a way that we're not able to convert those leads into money with additional marketing on the back end. And by the way, this campaign, they had phone reps. They had actually a huge phone room. They did their dead level best to monetize those leads, and it just wasn't going to happen. So let's go in yet another tangential direction. Because with the rise of platforms, the concept I'm about to lay out has pretty much gone away. And it's that in days past, you heard something like this, which was 40, 40, 20. Okay, 40% was the list, 40% was the offer, hello, and 20% was copy. What does that mean? It means when you took stock of the entire marketing campaign, all the assets, all the people, the whole thing, everybody wants to plant their flag and say, I was responsible for that, especially copywriters, man. We are the worst. We will take all the credit. Same goes on the marketing front. So if you talk to a copywriter, what they're going to tell you is that, oh man, copy is king. But it's not. When you get to, marketing, especially executives, the product in techs, like the product guys, oh man, it's the offer. Like what we put out there in the marketplace, that's what really drives it. Kind of. The real work happens in the list. Now, unfortunately, today, the platforms have all but erased this concept. And I get it. Zuckerberg needs to take over the universe. He needs to put as much money in his pocket. The Google guys, same thing. They want to put an abstracted layer. And so instead of a list, you've got an algo, right? An algorithm. You've got their magic that's going on in the background where supposedly they're going to be able to pick out the proper list for you. In reality, what they're doing is just picking our pockets, right? These people know which lists are going to convert. And their job is to make their computers divvy out those leads in such a way that you don't give up and go somewhere else, or you don't give up and turn off your ads. It's just that simple. There's no magic algorithm. They don't have any super AI insight into human behavior. They simply have the list of buyers, and they connect you with a certain amount of buyers to keep you coming and a certain amount of non-buyers to line their pockets. Period, full stop. So it's a little bit more difficult these days to actually accomplish what I'm talking about, but you can still do it. So now let me try and take a deep breath and bring all this home. So because we can't specifically target lists as cheaply as we could, because if you go in there and you try and layer on custom audiences, your costs go up. Now, why would they do that? Because, well, and this is just an aside. Just think about the math for a minute. If Facebook can get you to spend on 1,000 impressions versus, 1,000,000 impressions versus 1,000 impressions, it's a different psychological game. So at this level, you're working for it. It seems reasonable. It's like you can justify some of the spend. But if you're looking at this, you really can't. Why? Pardon the scroll, all the way back here. Because most people are conditioned to think in terms of cheapness, not quality. So part of what they're doing, it's almost a necessity because of you and me and our psychology. But I want you to just think about this for a minute. If you saw you had a certain number of sales and only 1,000 impressions, how would you really feel about that? Same goes for a list size. When I was building my e-commerce and technology platform back in 2007, my core list was between 32 and 37,000 people. That's it. And off of that, we generated about 52 million a year. It's amazing, right? Start to do some of the math of what our long-term value was, or our lifetime value was. It's pretty amazing. Mostly, it's because those people represented a share of wallet that was outsized. Right, so now we're getting into the concept of the list. This is something that a lot of people just don't like to think about. But we got to talk about it. If you're Jeff Bezos, I think that's how you spell his name, or Elon Musk, your discretionary spending capability is pretty much higher than everybody else's. We can agree on that. If you're homeless, your discretionary spending is far more limited. So if you are marketing to somebody like Jeff Bezos versus marketing to someone who's homeless, you can expect much different outcomes. Now, I understand there's a lot of space in between. Just go with me here. I go from one extreme to the other to eventually get to the middle, right? Let's get to the middle. In the middle, between these two camps, is a whole lot of territory. In between Jeff Bezos and a homeless person, is a lot of land. And what we're going to refine down to is this concept of a list. Now, remember, the platforms are hiding the list from us. So the way we access that list is through copy. Now, I've introduced some key points here. Key point number one is going back up here. Remember, we talked about that failed front end campaign. The way you advertise to people, the way you market to people in your benefits, in your pain, in your problems, in your case studies. Back in the day, we used to call this day in the life, a day in the life. All of this will call out to a particular list. So this is the workaround. You and your marketing team need to sit down and think through the kinds of ads, the kinds of videos, the kinds of case studies, the pain points, the problems that will feed into the people that you likely want. Now, I've got bad news, especially if you're a SaaS founder. You're going to have to meet people. You're going to have to actually talk to people, or you're going to have to get a guy like me that doesn't mind talking to people, actually likes, maybe even loves talking to people, to figure out what are their problems, what kind of pains do they have. Remember, this is emotion, by the way. And then how do I put those together into case studies? That's going to be your key. And so when you put all of that out into the platforms, what you wind up getting, yes, that does feed into the algorithms, right? They do look at the language. They are going to use that in their comparative way and in their language models. Why? Because those are the markers that they use to select the list. And you're going to call out to them. So this is a round robin kind of iterative process where you test all the stuff over here, see what kind of list you get, which means your sales staff, your BDRs in particular. So if you've got if you don't know what that is, business development rep, this is somebody who's going to qualify the lead, right? Those BDRs need to have different data points so that you can understand if these benefits give you the list that you want, right? So the strategy starts to look at this from a holistic standpoint, where so your marketing is closely tied to your sales. So whoever's constructing the scripts on the sales end should be talking to a guy like me who's generating ads and thinking through marketing strategy, because my stuff should feed directly into what that script is going to say. And more importantly, as the sales managers are reviewing the scripts and reviewing the results of the scripts, they can go back to marketing and say, yeah, you know what? We've got this case study in there, and we've had a lot of people that said, oh, yeah, I saw that, but that never happens. Maybe we should take it down. Maybe then the marketing guy can say to the sales guy, well, you know what? What kind of questions can we ask to maybe elicit a better case study? Because psychologically, if you've got somebody that's like, oh man, that never happens. Oh, so tell me, I mean, how much different is it? Like what usually happens? Oh my goodness. Well, we do blah, 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 blah. Write that down. And then see if other people respond that way on the sales calls. Like keep the marketing going. It's like that could be a one-off. But if you start to see it again and again and again, and more importantly, when they start giving you the same stories, salespeople should say, hey, marketing, new fodder for a new case study. That's how this works. It's an iterative process, right? But again, this doesn't come from marketing thinking cheap leads. It certainly doesn't come from CMO, CEO driving down, well, we need cheaper leads. All of this stuff has got to work together. And so if you've got a CMO, CRO that doesn't think this way, you're probably going to be hurting. Why do I say that? We are coming up to a crushing recession. This is, unpopular prediction number 6,354,000. And when that happens, remember we talked about share of wallet, even these guys, and I would say especially these guys, start to cut discretionary spending, right? And more people start moving towards that direction where, we'll take this off because people are more sensitive these days. We'll just say lower spend, right? People start moving towards the lower spend direction. The way you increase your share of wallet when people start cutting back their expenses is to go through this process, understand there's an iterative process to it, and get to this. If you get good at actually solving people's problems in a unique way, they'll spend money with you, even if they're cutting spending everywhere else. Why? Because that's how people are. That's what they need to do, particularly if you're in a B2B situation. But I would say even more so when you're talking about a recession, if you can make it happen. Why? Because there's all this pain out there, like, man, I'm starting to feel bad. Well, if you can lift that up, it's like, whoa, I'd feel a lot better if this problem were solved. Then you solve their problem. Now, might you have to cut your prices? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of cutting prices. Can you go to different terms, payment plans, extend things out, have them sign a 2-year agreement, give them a reduced price for the first year because in year 2 and 3, we're going to be coming out of that recession. Again, you need a holistic plan. You need to talk when you have somebody like me on your team, where guys like me, gals like me can think holistically about what's going on. You're not going to get locked into this onesie twosie tactical kind of thinking, because we can approach the situation appropriately, right? So going back all the way up to the top, when you think cheap leads, when you think ROAS, when you think fill in your data point here, you are leaving so much money on the table, you don't even know it. And the biggest expense, stealing a line from a friend of mine, Jeremy Miner, your biggest expense is the thing you don't know about. I totally butchered that, Jeremy. Sorry. You know how to get a hold of me.